She stands alone at the military hearing, 7 dead soldiers on her conscience and career in ruins. The officers laugh under their breath as the major dismantles her testimony. "The lieutenant's story is fiction," he announces with a smirk. No one believes her version of events. No one knows she's carrying the evidence that will silence that room forever. As she reaches slowly into her pocket, the laughter stops. The major's face turns ashen, because what she places on the table bears his own unit's mark. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you value stories of courage and truth, please consider subscribing to support more content like this. The sterile military review room fell silent as Lieutenant Sloan Winters took her seat at the isolated table. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her face, highlighting a thin scar that traced her jawline before disappearing beneath her collar. Her uniform was immaculate despite the faint signs of field repairs, and though she hadn't slept in 72 hours, her posture remained perfect and her gaze alert. Across from her sat the review panel, led by Major Reese Curtis, a man whose practiced smile never quite reached his eyes. To his left, Captain Aurelius Nash studied a tablet with obvious skepticism. To his right, Colonel Zephyr Hammond and Major Callista Vale maintained carefully neutral expressions. Behind them, 2 MPs stood guard at the door, their presence unusual for what was supposedly a standard mission review. "Let's begin," Curtis announced, activating the display screens with a confident tap. Operation Kingfisher, a routine extraction that resulted in 7 dead soldiers and millions in destroyed equipment. His tone carried the subtle edge of someone discussing an inconvenient administrative error rather than a tragedy. The screens filled with tactical maps, mission parameters, and personnel files. At the center was Sloan's official photograph, her expression stoic against the standardized blue background. "Lieutenant Winters claims communication failures led to the tragedy," Curtis continued, emphasizing the word claims with obvious doubt. "Our logs show all systems were operational. She claims extraction was impossible. Our analysts say otherwise." He gestured to the mission schematics floating on the screen. "What we have is a fundamental disconnect between Lieutenant Winters' account and objective reality." Sloan remained still, her breathing measured, her eyes tracking each piece of evidence as it appeared. When Colonel Hammond asked her to recount the initial landing, she spoke in precise, measured tones. "We reached the primary LZ at 0217 as scheduled. Initial scans showed no hostile activity. At 02224, as we began descent, we encountered unexpected resistance from the northeast ridge. Corporal Eisen reported the communications array took direct fire at 0231. Yet the logs show clear transmissions from your unit until Oro 417. Curtis interjected, "Nearly 2 hours after you claimed communications were lost." "Those logs are incorrect, sir." Curtis's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Are you suggesting our communications officers falsified records, Lieutenant?" "I'm suggesting the logs don't match the reality on the ground, sir." Several officers exchanged glances. Captain Nash made a note on his tablet, his expression thoughtful. As the morning session continued, Curtis systematically dismantled Sloan's account. For every detail she provided, he produced contradictory evidence: satellite imagery, communications logs, equipment diagnostics. The narrative he constructed depicted not a mission gone wrong due to unexpected circumstances, but an officer who had panicked under pressure and made catastrophic decisions. Sloan contested each point with the same quiet precision, never raising her voice, never showing frustration. Only the faint tightening around her eyes betrayed the toll this process was taking. During a brief recess, Sloan stood alone by the window, watching rain begin to fall on the base. The droplets traced erratic paths down the glass, merging and separating, like the fractured timelines being discussed in the review room. The weather matched the mood inside: gray, oppressive, the promise of worse to come. When they reconvened, Major Vale spoke for the first time. "Lieutenant, walk us through the moment you decided to disobey the extraction order." Before Sloan could answer, Curtis interjected. "To clarify, Lieutenant Winters acknowledges receiving the order to extract immediately, but chose to ignore it." "I did not ignore the order," Sloan corrected. "I determined it was not executable without abandoning wounded personnel." "The order specifically accounted for casualties," Curtis countered. You were instructed to extract all mobile personnel and mark the location of the wounded for a follow-up team. A team that never came, Sloan noted quietly. Curtis's eyes narrowed. Because your continued presence in the hot zone made recovery impossible. As afternoon faded into evening, the review continued without break. The tactical screens cycled through mission data, each image reinforcing the official narrative that Curtis was building. Sloan's decisions appeared increasingly reckless when viewed through this selective lens. The lieutenant seems to have experienced a different mission entirely, Curtis remarked with a thin smile. Several officers chuckled under their breath. Colonel Hammond cleared his throat. Lieutenant, do you stand by your statement that you received no extraction coordinates after the initial landing zone was compromised? Yes, sir, she responded without hesitation. Then explain how 3 separate communication officers logged those coordinates as received and acknowledged by your unit. Sloan's eyes narrowed slightly, the first crack in her composed exterior. Those logs are incorrect, sir. Are you suggesting falsified records, Lieutenant? Curtis interjected, his smile disappearing. I'm stating a fact, sir. We never received those coordinates. As the first day of review concluded, Sloan gathered her notes with methodical precision. The room had emptied quickly, officers hurrying away as though her supposed failure might be contagious. Only Captain Nash lingered, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The hallway outside was quiet, the administrative section of the base largely deserted at this hour. Sloan's footsteps echoed against the polished floor, a lonely percussion that matched her isolation. As she rounded the corner toward temporary quarters, a figure stepped from the shadows. Lieutenant Winters. She turned to find Sergeant Talon Reed, a communications specialist she recognized from the base command center. He glanced nervously over his shoulder before continuing. I shouldn't be talking to you, but something about the comms log doesn't add up. The timestamps don't align with server records. I was going to bring it up, but they removed me from the investigation yesterday. Sloan studied him carefully. Why are you telling me this? Reed's eyes darted around again. I served with Corporal Eisen in Kandahar. He was the best comm specialist I ever met. If he said communications were down, they were down. Before he could continue, footsteps approached from around the corner. Reed stepped back quickly. I need to go. Just wanted you to know, not everyone believes the official story. Major Curtis appeared, his expression darkening when he saw them together. Fraternizing with the witness, Sergeant. No, sir. Just passing through, sir. Reed hurried away, leaving Sloan alone with Curtis's measuring stare. Interesting timing, Curtis remarked. I hope you're not trying to influence potential witnesses, Lieutenant. I don't need to influence anyone who knows the truth, sir. Curtis stepped closer, lowering his voice. The truth is what the official record says it is. Your version is becoming increasingly isolated, much like your position in that hot zone. I recommend you consider carefully how you want this review to conclude. Is that a threat, sir? That's a reality check, Lieutenant. 7 good soldiers are dead. Someone has to account for that. The question is whether it's going to be just you or whether others get dragged down with you. He walked away, leaving the implicit threat hanging in the air between them. Sloan's temporary quarters were sparse. A bunk, a desk, a small bathroom. She placed her notebook on the desk and sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing her shoulders to slump slightly now that no eyes were watching. From her pocket, she removed a small metal object, a bullet, misshapen by impact, but still recognizable, with distinctive markings along its base. She turned it over in her palm, studying it as though it might speak to her. Then she returned it to her pocket and began to prepare for the next day's session. The second morning brought a forensic analysis of the mission equipment. The technical specialist, a nervous young lieutenant named Pax, presented findings that all communication systems were functional during Operation Kingfisher. If I may, sir, Sloan interjected, our primary and backup systems were inoperable after the initial firefight. We were forced to use emergency protocols. Curtis dismissed this with a wave. The technical data contradicts that claim, Lieutenant. With respect, Sloan persisted, the diagnostic logs only show power to the systems, not operational capacity. The transmitter was physically damaged. Lieutenant Pax glanced uncertainly between Sloan and Curtis. It's possible for a system to register as powered while being functionally inoperable if the damage is to the antenna array rather than the main unit. Curtis's expression hardened. Thank you, Lieutenant. That will be all. As Pax gathered his materials, Major Vale spoke up unexpectedly. "I'd like to hear more about these emergency protocols. How exactly did you establish communications after the primary systems failed?" When Curtis attempted to move on, Vale persisted. "It's relevant to understanding the full timeline." Sloan described how her team had rigged a damaged field radio to reach the nearest forward operating base, a technical improvisation that wasn't standard procedure but demonstrated remarkable field engineering. "Where did you learn that particular modification?" Vale asked, her interest visibly piqued. Before Sloan could answer, Curtis interrupted. "We're getting off track. The issue isn't the lieutenant's technical skills, but her decision to disobey direct orders." Captain Nash, who had been silent until now, studied Sloan with newfound curiosity. "Your file mentioned special training at Fort Bragg in 2021, but the details are redacted. What unit were you with?" "That information isn't relevant to this review," Curtis cut in sharply. The tension in the room shifted subtly, a hint that Sloan's background contained something significant that Curtis didn't want examined. During the lunch recess, Sloan found herself alone in the empty review room, the tactical displays still cycling through mission data. She approached one screen, studying the satellite imagery of the extraction zone. Something about the terrain mapping didn't match her memory of the area. The ridgeline appeared different, the elevation contours subtly altered. The door opened behind her, and she turned to find Captain Nash entering with 2 cups of coffee. He offered one to her without comment. "Thank you, sir." Nash nodded toward the screen she'd been studying. "Seeing something interesting, Lieutenant?" "The terrain mapping is wrong," she said simply. "That ridgeline was steeper, with less cover than shown here." Nash sipped his coffee. "Are you sure about that? Satellite imaging is pretty reliable." "I'm sure, sir. My team spent 14 hours defending that position. I know every rock and shadow of that ridge." He studied her for a long moment. "I knew Zane Eisen. We served together in the 45th before he transferred to your unit. Hell of a soldier. Not the type to miss crucial communications." "No, sir, he wasn't." Nash lowered his voice. "This review isn't going how it's supposed to. There are questions that should be asked that aren't being asked. People who should be testifying who aren't on the witness list." Before Sloan could respond, footsteps approached the door. Nash moved away, his expression returning to professional neutrality as Curtis entered, followed by the rest of the panel. That evening, when Sloan returned to her quarters, she found a small data drive slipped under her door. When she plugged it into her secured tablet, it contained partial communication logs from Operation Kingfisher, logs that differed significantly from those presented during the review. A message appeared. "Not everyone believes the official story. More tomorrow. Watch your back." She had barely finished reviewing the files when a knock came at her door. She quickly tucked the drive into her boot before opening it to find Captain Nash standing there. "This visit is off the record," he began, keeping his voice low. "I served with Eisen before he was on your team. He wouldn't have missed those extraction coordinates if they were sent. He was too good." Sloan said nothing, waiting. "Look, there are rumors about what really happened out there. Some say your team found something you weren't supposed to see." "My mission brief was to extract a 3-man intelligence team," Sloan responded evenly. "That's what we attempted to do." Nash studied her for a moment. "Curtis has a lot of friends in high places. This review is a formality. The decision's already been made." "Then why are you here?" "Because 7 good soldiers died, and the story doesn't add up." He hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Curtis has requested command of the Special Reconnaissance Group launching next month, the same role you were being considered for before Kingfisher." The implication hung in the air between them. If Sloan took the fall for Kingfisher, Curtis would secure a prestigious command that might otherwise have gone to her. After Nash left, Sloan removed a small notebook hidden in her boot lining. Inside were handwritten coordinates, timestamps, and notes from the mission. A personal log kept separate from all official systems. She added the information from the data drive, creating a parallel record that contradicted the official narrative at nearly every point. As she worked, she occasionally glanced at the bullet sitting on her desk. In the harsh light of the single lamp, its distinctive markings were clearly visible, markings that didn't match any enemy ammunition recovered from the operation site, markings that belonged to a very specific unit within the American forces. The bullet was more than evidence. It was a silent witness to the truth of what had happened that night, a truth that someone was working very hard to bury, along with the memories of 7 dead soldiers. On the third day, the review room felt smaller somehow, the air heavier with unspoken accusations. The panel members arrived separately, their expressions guarded as they took their seats. Colonel Hammond's uniform was impeccably pressed, a contrast to the slight dishevelment of Captain Nash, who appeared to have slept poorly. Major Vale's absence was conspicuous, her chair remaining empty as the session began. Curtis wasted no time in pressing his advantage. Today we'll review the visual evidence from Operation Kingfisher. He gestured to the large screen at the front of the room. We've recovered helmet camera footage from Corporal Zane Eisen, the team's communications specialist. Sloane's expression remained neutral, but her attention sharpened visibly. This was new information she hadn't been briefed on. The footage began playing, showing chaotic scenes of the initial landing. The camera jerked with Eisen's movements as he established a defensive position, called out enemy locations, and monitored communications equipment. The audio captured his voice clearly as he coordinated with other team members. Timestamp 0227, Curtis narrated. Note that communications appear fully functional at this point. The footage continued through the early firefight, then abruptly jumped forward. The lighting had changed, the position was different, and several wounded soldiers were visible in the background. Timestamp 0415, Curtis continued smoothly. Again, communications appear operational as Corporal Eisen relays information to the team. Sloane leaned forward slightly. That footage has been edited, she stated firmly, drawing shocked looks from around the table. There's approximately 43 minutes missing between those two segments. Curtis's face hardened. Are you accusing the investigative team of tampering with evidence, Lieutenant? I'm stating a fact. That footage is incomplete. Colonel Hammond leaned forward, his authoritative presence filling the room. That's a serious accusation without proof, Lieutenant Winters. The room fell silent as Sloane reached into her uniform pocket and produced a small, scorched USB drive. This contains Corporal Eisen's backup footage, she explained, placing it carefully on the table. He always kept a secondary recording, a habit from his previous deployment. I recovered it from his body before evacuation. Curtis stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Any evidence should have been submitted through proper channels. This is highly irregular and potentially compromised. I attempted to submit it upon return, Sloane responded calmly. It was logged into evidence and then mysteriously disappeared from the case file. Convenient claim, Lieutenant, Curtis retorted. Unfortunately, we have no record of any such submission. I have the receipt, Sloane countered, producing a folded paper from her breast pocket. Signed by Sergeant Lowell at 600 on April 18th. Colonel Hammond examined the receipt with a furrowed brow. This appears to be in order, Major Curtis. Why wasn't this drive included in the evidence review? Curtis's composure slipped momentarily. I wasn't personally responsible for cataloging physical evidence, Colonel. This is the first I'm hearing of any backup recording. Captain Nash spoke up, his voice deliberately neutral. I'd like to see the lieutenant's footage. If Corporal Eisen did create a backup, it could provide valuable context for our review. After a tense debate, the panel agreed to view Sloane's evidence the following day after it was properly processed, a procedure Curtis insisted upon for evidence integrity. Hammond reluctantly agreed, effectively giving Curtis time to prepare a counter-strategy. As the session concluded, Sloane noticed a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. Where before there had been united skepticism toward her account, now there were fracture lines. Nash watched Curtis with barely concealed suspicion. Hammond seemed troubled by the missing evidence. Only Curtis maintained his certainty, though his confidence now seemed forced. In the hallway outside, Sloane caught sight of Sergeant Reed being escorted to a security office by military police. Their eyes met briefly before he was led away, his expression a mixture of apology and resignation. Lieutenant Winters? She turned to find Major Vale approaching from the opposite direction, her uniform slightly rumpled as though she'd been working through the night. Major, you missed this morning's session. Vale glanced around the empty hallway before speaking. I've been reviewing some inconsistencies in the communication logs. I'd like to speak with you privately. Before Sloane could respond, Curtis appeared at the end of the corridor. Vale stiffened, then nodded formally to Sloane. We'll continue this discussion later, Lieutenant. She walked away, passing Curtis with a terse acknowledgement. Curtis watched her go, then turned his attention to Sloane. Making friends, Lieutenant? I wouldn't count on Major Vale's support. She understands chain of command. Is that what this is about, sir? Chain of command or something else? Curtis stepped closer, lowering his voice. You should have taken the honorable way out when it was offered. Now you're just making it worse for yourself and anyone who stands with you. Is that what happened to Sergeant Reed? A cold smile touched Curtis's lips. Reed is being questioned about potential security breaches. It seems someone accessed classified communications logs without authorization. He left her standing alone in the hallway, the implicit threat hanging in the air like a storm cloud. That evening, Sloane paced her small quarters, the walls seeming to close in around her. The bullet. She'd kept sat on the desk beside Eisen's backup drive, both objects catching the harsh light from the single lamp. She picked up the bullet, feeling its weight, the twisted metal a physical reminder of the truth she was fighting to expose. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She quickly concealed both items before opening the door to find Captain Nash. May I come in, Lieutenant? She stepped aside, allowing him to enter. He scanned the room with professional habit, then spoke in a hushed tone. Major Vale has been reassigned, effective immediately. Security concerns, they're saying. Sloane absorbed this information silently. There's more, Nash continued. The intelligence team you were sent to extract. 2 of them were reported killed during the operation. The 3rd is missing, presumed dead. That's not possible, Sloane responded, her composure finally cracking. We extracted all 3. They were alive when we delivered them to the forward medical unit. Nash's expression darkened. The official record says otherwise. According to the files, your team never made contact with the intelligence unit. Sloane moved to her desk and removed a small notebook from a hidden compartment beneath the drawer. She opened it to a page filled with handwritten notes. April 17th, 03:47 hours. Intel team extracted. Captain Farrow with gunshot wound to left shoulder. Lieutenant Davenport with concussion. Specialist Crane uninjured. Delivered to forward medical at 0529 hours. Signed for by Major Henley. Nash studied the notes, his brow furrowed. This contradicts everything in the official record. The official record is being systematically falsified, Sloane stated, the quiet certainty in her voice more powerful than any emotional outburst. The question is why? Whatever the reason, Curtis is accelerating his timeline. Your evidence review has been moved up to 0700 tomorrow. He's also requested additional security personnel be present. Sloane nodded, processing this information. He's worried about what's on Eisen's backup drive. With good reason, I suspect. Nash moved toward the door, then paused. Be careful, Lieutenant. Whatever happened out there, it's bigger than a failed extraction. People are being silenced. After Nash left, Sloane sat at her desk and opened her tablet. She connected Eisen's backup drive, praying that the damaged device would still function. After several tense moments, the drive initialized. She began copying the files, creating multiple backups on separate devices hidden throughout her quarters. As the files transferred, she reviewed her personal notes once more. There was a pattern emerging, a timeline that contradicted the official record at every critical juncture. She could see Curtis's hand in the manipulation, but something was missing the motive. Why go to such lengths to discredit her team and erase the successful extraction of the intelligence unit? The answer had to be on Eisen's drive. Dawn came too quickly. The first pale light filtering through her window, finding Sloane already awake, already in uniform. She had slept only briefly, spending most of the night reviewing the footage from Eisen's backup. What she found confirmed her worst suspicions and raised new questions that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The review room was noticeably different when Sloane arrived. 2 additional security officers had been posted at the door. Major Vale's seat remained empty, but now Colonel Hammond sat alone on the panel. Captain Nash was absent as well, with no explanation offered for the suddenly diminished review board. Most concerning of all was the presence of a senior intelligence officer Sloane didn't recognize, sitting in the back corner, observing silently. Curtis appeared supremely confident as he strode into the room, nodding to Hammond and the intelligence officer. Good morning, Colonel. I trust you've been briefed on the developments overnight. Hammond nodded stiffly, his expression unreadable. Proceed, Major. Curtis turned to Sloane, his smile sharp as a blade. Lieutenant Winter's supposed evidence has been analyzed by our technical team. The drive was found to be corrupted beyond recovery, Convenient perhaps, but ultimately irrelevant. Sloan showed no reaction to this news, which seemed to irritate Curtis. Furthermore, he continued, his voice hardening, Sergeant Reed has provided testimony that Lieutenant Winters attempted to coerce him into supporting her version of events by accessing and potentially altering communications logs. Colonel Hammond looked troubled. Is this true, Lieutenant? No, sir, Sloan answered calmly. Sergeant Reed approached me, not the other way around. He expressed concerns about irregularities in the communication logs. Curtis smiled thinly. A convenient claim with no witnesses. The tension in the room ratcheted higher as Curtis continued presenting his case. He outlined a narrative of a mission compromised by Sloan's poor judgment, supported by selectively edited evidence and testimony from witnesses Sloan had never been allowed to question. Throughout it all, she remained composed, watching Curtis with the steady gaze of a predator tracking its prey, waiting for the right moment. When Curtis finally concluded, Hammond turned to her. Lieutenant Winters, do you have anything to add before we conclude this review? Sloan sat perfectly still for a moment, then spoke with quiet precision. Permission to present alternative evidence, sir? Hammond nodded cautiously while Curtis's expression flickered with momentary uncertainty. Sloan placed a small laptop on the table and connected it to the room's display system. What you're about to see is my personal helmet camera footage from Operation Kingfisher. Unlike Corporal Eisen's footage, this wasn't submitted to the investigation because I was told it had been destroyed in the firefight. Curtis stood immediately. Colonel, this is highly irregular. Any evidence should have been processed through proper channels, Sloan finished for him. Yes, sir. That's why I submitted copies to both Major Vale and Captain Nash last night. The mention of these names caused Curtis to falter momentarily. His eyes darted to the empty seats where they should have been sitting. Proceed, Lieutenant, Hammond ordered, ignoring Curtis's objection. Sloan pressed play. The footage began, showing the mission from her perspective. Unlike the sanitized version Curtis presented, this footage was raw and unfiltered. It showed the initial landing going according to plan until unexpected heavy fire erupted from positions that should have been secure. Note the timestamp and coordinates, Sloan commented. This position was supposed to be clear according to intelligence briefings. The footage continued through the firefight until a critical moment when Eisen shouted, "Comms are down, primary and backup systems hit," Curtis interjected. This proves nothing. The communications logs clearly show. Watch, Sloan interrupted, focusing on the footage. Then, impossibly, Curtis's voice came through on an emergency channel. Lieutenant Winters, abort mission immediately. Extraction coordinates follow. Sloan's voice responded, Major, we have wounded who can't be moved. Request immediate air support at our position. Curtis's voice cold and clear. Negative, Lieutenant. Intel indicates your position will be overrun within the hour. Evacuate all mobile personnel immediately. That's an order. The camera panned to show 3 critically wounded soldiers who would be left behind under such an order. Sloan's response was measured but firm. Negative on that order, sir. We're not leaving them. Curtis's voice hardened. That's an order, Lieutenant. Pull back now or face court-martial. The room had fallen completely silent. Colonel Hammond stared at the screen, his expression darkening as he witnessed the exchange that Curtis had claimed never occurred. Curtis himself stood frozen, his face draining of color, as his own words played back for everyone to hear. The footage continued, showing Sloan organizing a defensive position, treating the wounded, and maintaining the perimeter. The timestamps contradicted the official timeline at every turn, revealing that her team had held their position for hours after Curtis had officially reported them overrun and lost. Then came the moment that changed everything. The camera captured a radio transmission that Curtis had never mentioned, never included in any report. Curtis's voice, speaking to an unknown recipient, Kingfisher is a loss. Proceed with Operation Clean Sweep at the primary site. No witnesses. The unknown voice responded, confirmed. Clean sweep authorized. No witnesses. As the recording ended, the review room remained completely silent. Colonel Hammond stared at the screen, his military bearing momentarily forgotten as he processed what he'd just witnessed. The intelligence officer in the back had risen to his feet, his hand pressed to an earpiece as he listened to instructions from unseen authorities. Curtis stood frozen, his carefully constructed narrative collapsing around him. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its commanding edge. "This footage has clearly been altered. The lieutenant is attempting to—" "Be quiet, Major," Hammond ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Lieutenant Winters, where is the rest of this footage?" "There are 3 additional hours, sir," Sloan replied calmly. "It shows our continued defense of the position, the arrival of the intelligence team we were sent to extract, and our eventual evacuation with both the intelligence personnel and our wounded. Curtis attempted one final counterattack. Colonel, this is an obvious fabrication. The intelligence team was never recovered. They were reported KIA." "By you," Sloan stated, facing Curtis directly for the first time. "You reported them killed in action, when in fact they were safely extracted and delivered to the forward medical unit. The question is why?" Before Curtis could respond, the doors opened and Major Vale entered, accompanied by General Thaddeus Blackwood, the theater commander. Behind them were Sergeant Reed and 2 military police officers. Reed's face showed evidence of recent questioning, a bruise darkening his left cheek, but his eyes held steady as he met Sloan's gaze. "Colonel Hammond," General Blackwood addressed the senior officer, "Major Vale has brought some concerning information to my attention regarding Operation Kingfisher and subsequent events." Major Vale stepped forward, her uniform now perfectly pressed, her demeanor fully professional. "After reviewing Lieutenant Winters' evidence last night, I initiated a security protocol to protect both the evidence and the witness. What we've uncovered appears to be a deliberate attempt to cover up unauthorized operations in Sector 7-3. Curtis attempted to interject, but General Blackwood silenced him with a raised hand. "Major Curtis, you are relieved of duty pending a full investigation. These officers will escort you to security." As Curtis was led away, Sloan remained seated, her expression unchanged. Only the slight relaxation of her shoulders betrayed any reaction to this dramatic reversal. General Blackwood turned to Sloan. "Lieutenant, there will be a complete review of Operation Kingfisher with all available evidence. In the meantime, you are reinstated to active duty, effective immediately." Hammond seemed to struggle with the implications of what had transpired. "Sir, the intelligence team, the reports all indicated they were lost." "Those reports were falsified," Blackwood confirmed. "Captain Nash is currently debriefing them at a secure facility. Their testimony corroborates Lieutenant Winters' account in full." As the room began to clear, Sergeant Reed approached Sloan with a small evidence bag. Inside was a bullet distinctive, marked with Curtis's unit insignia. "Found this embedded in your communication array," he said quietly. "Ballistics confirmed it came from Major Curtis's secondary unit, the one that wasn't supposed to be anywhere near your position that night." Sloan took the bullet and placed it on the table. "That's where it came from," she said simply. "The blast you left us in." The symbolism of the moment wasn't lost on anyone present. That single bullet represented everything that had transpired: the betrayal, the attempt to silence the truth, and ultimately, the evidence that could not be erased. One by one, the officers in the room stood at attention. Colonel Hammond was the first to salute, followed by Vale and the others. The transformation was complete, from accused to vindicated, from scapegoat to hero. 1 week later, Sloan stood alone before the memorial wall, where the names of her fallen team members had been freshly engraved. She wore a new uniform, with restored rank insignia, but her expression remained solemn. The morning light filtered through the high windows of the memorial hall, casting long beams that illuminated the polished surface of the wall. She traced each name with her gaze, remembering faces, voices, moments shared in the crucible of combat. Unlike the stark fluorescent lighting of the review room, here the natural sunlight felt healing, restorative, a fitting tribute to lives cut short. General Blackwood approached, his footsteps echoing in the quiet space. He stood beside her in respectful silence before speaking. "The full investigation has confirmed everything in your report, Lieutenant. Curtis was running unauthorized operations in Sector 7-3 weapons transfers that violated international agreements. Your team stumbled into the middle of it." Sloan nodded once but said nothing. "He tried to abort your mission to protect his operation. When that failed, he ordered clean sweep to eliminate any witnesses and blame it on enemy forces." Blackwood shook his head. 7 good soldiers died to protect one man's illegal activities. 8, Sloan corrected quietly. Specialist Forrest died yesterday from his injuries. Blackwood nodded solemnly. "The official record has been corrected. Your team's actions have been reclassified as exemplary service under extreme duress. Posthumous commendations for all who were lost. He produced a small box and opened it to reveal the silver star. This is long overdue, Lieutenant. Your actions saved 3 wounded men who had been written off as casualties. Your defense of that position against overwhelming odds represents the highest traditions of service. As he pinned the medal to her uniform, Sloane finally spoke. It should be them receiving this, sir. They've received their recognition, Blackwood assured her, and the truth of their sacrifice will be remembered. The corridor outside the memorial hall bustled with the routine activity of the base personnel moving with purpose, conversations about duty rotations and training schedules. The normal rhythm of military life continued, a sharp contrast to the solemn moment Sloane had just shared with Blackwood. Captain Nash approached, accompanied by several officers Sloane recognized from the Special Reconnaissance Division. The group fell silent as they noticed her newly awarded Silver Star. "Lieutenant Winters," Nash greeted her with newfound respect. "The Special Reconnaissance Command position is yours, if you want it." The selection board's decision was unanimous. Sloane studied the officers with her characteristic careful assessment. These would be her team, her responsibility, if she accepted. "Thank you, Captain. I'll accept on one condition that we rename the unit after Corporal Eisen. His backup protocols save more than just the mission record." Nash nodded with understanding. "Already in process. The Eisen Reconnaissance Unit launches next month." As the officers dispersed, Major Vale remained behind. The 2 women studied each other for a moment, a new understanding passing between them. "You knew, didn't you?" Sloane asked quietly. "About Curtis." Vale nodded slightly. "I had suspicions, no proof, until you provided it. Why did you help me?" "Because 3 years ago, I lost a team under similar circumstances. No one believed my report either." She met Sloane's eyes. "The system isn't perfect, but it works when good soldiers refuse to let the truth die." "And the intelligence team?" "Safe. Their information has proven invaluable, particularly regarding Curtis's network of illegal arms transfers. We've already shut down 3 smuggling routes and identified 12 collaborators." Sloane absorbed this information, connecting it with her own observations during the mission. "That's why he was so desperate to silence us. We weren't just witnesses to a failed mission. We were witnesses to treason." "Exactly." Vale glanced at Sloane's Silver Star. "That recognition is well-deserved, Lieutenant. Few would have stood their ground against both enemy fire and friendly betrayal." Later that evening, Sloane visited the medical ward where the last survivors of her team were recovering. The hospital wing was quieter than the rest of the base. The lights dimmed to evening levels, the sounds muffled by privacy curtains and closed doors. Specialist Tariq Alamdar, his arm still in a sling, sat up when she entered. The bandages around his chest were fewer than the last time she'd visited, a sign of his gradual healing. "Lieutenant," he greeted her with a tired smile. "Heard you've been busy setting the record straight." "Just doing what needed to be done," she responded, taking a seat beside his bed. "Did they tell you about the ceremony tomorrow?" Sloane nodded. "General Blackwood mentioned it. The whole base is talking about it, how you stood alone against Curtis and his whole network, how you never backed down, even when they tried to bury the evidence." Alamdar's expression grew serious. "You saved us twice, Lieutenant, first out there, then back here." Sloane placed a small object on his bedside table. The bullet, now mounted on a simple wooden base with a plaque that read, "Truth finds its way home." "This belongs to all of you," she said quietly. "A reminder of what we faced together." Alamdar touched the mounted bullet gently. Eisen would have appreciated the irony. The bullet meant to silence us becoming the evidence that spoke loudest. He saved us all with his backup protocols. I don't think he ever knew how important that habit would become. "He knew," Alamdar said with certainty. "He used to say, in a world of digital manipulation, always keep an analog backup." Turns out he was right. The next morning, the base gathered for a formal recognition ceremony. Unlike the sterile review room, where Sloane had faced accusation and doubt, the assembly ground was open to the sky, the morning sun casting long shadows across the assembled formations of soldiers. The families of the fallen soldiers sat in the front row. Sloane had met with each of them privately the night before. sharing memories of their loved ones that wouldn't appear in any official report. The jokes, the small kindnesses, the quiet courage that defined each person beyond their military service. General Blackwood read the citation detailing the true events of Operation Kingfisher. The assembled soldiers stood at attention, listening as the narrative they had been told was officially corrected. What had been labeled a failure of leadership was now recognized as an extraordinary example of courage under the most challenging circumstances. When the citation concluded, Blackwood called Sloan forward. Instead of stepping directly to the podium, she first walked to the families, kneeling briefly to speak with each one, offering something small from her pocket to each personal effects, notes, or mementos from their loved ones that she had safeguarded. Only then did she approach the podium. Her address was brief and focused not on her own actions, but on the courage of her team. They were written off as a failed mission, she concluded, her clear voice carrying across the silent formation. Reported as overrun and lost. But they stood their ground, protected their wounded, and upheld the highest standards of service until help arrived. Their story deserves to be told accurately. Their sacrifice deserves to be honored truthfully. That's all I sought to ensure. As she stepped away from the podium, General Blackwood called the assembly to attention. In perfect unison, every soldier present rendered a salute, not just to Sloan, but to the memory of those who didn't return. The sun had risen higher now, eliminating the long shadows of early morning. In the clear light of day, there was no room for deception or manipulation, only the truth, finally acknowledged. 2 months later, Sloan stood in the early morning light, outside the barracks of the newly formed Eisen Reconnaissance Unit. The pre-dawn air was crisp, carrying the scent of desert dust and the faint aroma of coffee from the mess hall. Her uniform now bore the insignia of a captain, the promotion as much a recognition of her leadership during Kingfisher as it was an acknowledgement of the role she would now play. The door opened behind her, and Sergeant Reed stepped out, now serving as her communications chief. Teams assembled and ready for briefing, Captain. Thank you, Sergeant. I'll be right in. As Reed returned inside, Sloan took a moment to survey the base coming to life around her. The flag was being raised at headquarters, vehicles were moving along the perimeter road, and in the distance, a helicopter lifted off for an early patrol. She reached into her pocket and touched the small replica of the bullet she now carried, a reminder not of the betrayal, but of the truth it had eventually revealed. The original remained in a case in her office, alongside a photograph of her team from before Operation Kingfisher. Inside the briefing room, 12 soldiers waited, a mix of experienced operators and promising new recruits. Among them sat Specialist Alamdar, now fully recovered and eager to return to the field. On the wall behind them hung a plaque bearing the unit's motto, "Truth finds its way home." Sloan looked at their faces, reading the trust in their eyes. The kind of trust that could only be earned, never demanded. The kind of trust that came from knowing their commander would never abandon them, would never place politics above their lives, would never ask them to carry out an unlawful order. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and steady. "Today we begin our first official mission as the Eisen Reconnaissance Unit." She activated the briefing screen, displaying maps and intelligence data. As she outlined the mission parameters, she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced the worst that both enemies and allies could offer and had emerged stronger for it. "Questions?" she asked when the briefing concluded. Alamdar raised his hand. "Standard communication protocols, Captain." Sloan nodded. "Standard protocols, plus Eisen's backup system. Always keep an analog record." The team recognized the significance of this policy, a direct acknowledgement of the lesson learned from Operation Kingfisher. They nodded in unified understanding. As they filed out to prepare for deployment, Sloan remained behind for a moment. She looked at the empty room, then at the photograph of her original team. Their faces stared back at her men and women who had trusted her with their lives, some of whom had given those lives following her lead. "I remember," she said quietly to the photograph, "and I'll make sure everyone else does too." She switched off the light and closed the door behind her, stepping out into the full light of morning. Ahead lay the mission, the future, the chance to lead. Another team with the hard-won wisdom of experience. Behind remained the memory of those who had fallen, not as failures to be forgotten, but as heroes whose sacrifice had finally been acknowledged. The bullet that had once been meant to silence the truth had become instead its most powerful witness. That was a legacy worth carrying forward.